Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something that's becoming increasingly important to all of us: smart home gadget security.
Right.
And the reason we're focusing on that is that massive Mars Hydro data breach that hit the news a little while ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, we throw around these numbers all the time, like millions of records, billions of records, but billions.
It's hard to fathom.
It really
Yeah.
is. So we've got a cybersecurity research paper, a bunch of tech articles, some industry analysis, all about this. And we want to try and figure out, okay, what does this mean for you and me sitting here in our, increasingly smart homes?
Exactly. Yeah.
What does this mean for security going forward? So, 2.7 billion records, that's like, what, the population of China and India combined? Right?
Pretty much the scale of it's mind-boggling. It really is. And, what's interesting is that it wasn't some sophisticated hacking group that found this.
Right.
It was a security researcher, Jeremiah Fowler, just sort of poking around and stumbled upon this massive, unprotected database. 1.17 terabytes of data just sitting there out in the open.
1.17 terabytes. What is that even, like, what kind of information are we talking about here?
Yeah. So you mentioned the 2.7 billion records. We're not just talking names and emails. We're talking Wi-Fi passwords,
Oh, wow.
IP addresses, device IDs. We're talking API details. I mean, this is the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah.
This is how you control these devices.
So this wasn't just a breach of data. It was a breach of the devices themselves. And this was Mars Hydro, right?
It was.
The Grow Light company. I think they're based in China, right?
They are. They're based in China, but they also have this California-based affiliate, LG LED Solutions.
Okay.
And then it gets even more interesting because there's a connection to another grow light company, Spider Farmer.
Really?
So yeah, it's all a little bit murky.
Okay, so lots of layers to this. Can we break it down? Like, how did this even happen? How could they let this much sensitive data just be out in the open like that?
Right. It's really a lack of basic security hygiene. So we're talking data that was unencrypted,
Oh, wow.
just sitting there, plain text for anyone to grab,
Hmm.
weak passwords, outdated software. I mean, this is unfortunately pretty common in the IoT world.
So, okay, for our listeners out there, what does this mean, like, practically speaking? If someone has access to all this data, all these devices, what can they actually do?
Well, I mean, this is a huge deal. You're talking about unauthorized access to home networks, right?
Right.
Potentially your home network. Hackers can do things like man-in-the-middle attacks, where they're intercepting your data.
Right.
Even worse, they can hijack your devices and make them part of a botnet.
Okay, hold on. Botnet, what's that?
A botnet is essentially a network of infected devices that hackers control remotely to carry out large-scale cyber attacks.
So like a zombie army of devices.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it's not just, these large-scale attacks. Imagine someone controlling your smart lights,
Oh.
your thermostat, your security cameras. I mean, this breach is a wake-up call that these threats, they're not theoretical anymore. They're in our homes.
That's unsettling. And, we've talked about security risks, but what about privacy violations? What kind of concerns do we need to have there?
Right. I mean, this is where it gets really, really scary. We're talking about the potential for someone to spy on you through your own devices,
Right.
listening to conversations,
Yeah.
tracking your movement. I mean, it's like something out of a, dystopian sci-fi thriller, but it's a real possibility.
Yeah, it really is. It's like Big Brother, except it's not the government, it's hackers.
Right. And, the impact for businesses is huge, too. You're talking about potential lawsuits, costly fixes,
Hmm.
the reputational damage, the loss of consumer trust.
Oh, absolutely. Once you've lost that trust, it's really hard to get it back.
It really is.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting in the research paper was they talked about these contradictory privacy policies.
Right.
Mars Hydro's app claims that they don't collect user data.
Right.
And yet here we are, billions of records exposed.
Yeah. Yeah, it really makes you wonder how many other companies are, kind of playing fast and loose with our data.
Right, right. So, okay, big question. What can we actually do about this? Are we just sitting ducks?
Well, I mean, the good news is that there are things that we can do. The research paper actually outlines some really good practical steps that everyone should be taking.
Okay, so what's the first line of defense?
The first and most important is change those default passwords
Oh, yeah.
and make them strong. I'm talking upper and lowercase letters,
Yeah.
numbers, symbols. And don't use the same password for everything. I mean, it's like using the same key for your house, your car, your office.
Mm-hmm.
If someone gets that key, they get access to everything.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But I'll be honest, I have trouble remembering passwords.
Yeah, I hear it. There are password managers out there that can really help.
Oh, okay.
They can generate strong passwords for you, store them securely so you don't have to remember them all.
Okay. What else?
Next up, update your device firmware regularly.
Okay. So firmware, that's basically the software that runs the device, right?
Exactly. It's like patching the holes in your digital armor.
Got it. Keep the device updated. Okay. I'll admit, I sometimes ignore those update notifications.
I think we all do,
Yeah.
but it's really important to stay on top of them.
Okay, so strong passwords, update the firmware. The report also talked about network segmentation.
Yes.
What is that?
Network segmentation. It sounds complicated, but it's really not. Essentially, it's about separating your IoT devices from your computers and other sensitive data.
Right.
You're basically building a digital wall between your smart fridge and your bank account.
Okay, yeah, that's a good analogy.
So that way, if one device gets compromised, the hacker can't get to everything else.
That makes sense. So strong passwords, keep the firmware updated, network segmentation. Is there anything else?
Those are the big ones, but there are other things you can do. Disable features that you're not using. Be careful about what information you're sharing online. Be wary of suspicious links or emails. Really, just be vigilant.
So it sounds like we have more control over our digital security than we think we do.
We absolutely do.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just rely on companies to protect us. We have to take responsibility for our own cybersecurity.
Yeah. This Mars Hydro thing, this has really been an eye-opener, It just shows how vulnerable the whole IoT ecosystem still is.
It really does.
So I have to ask, what are the chances that companies are actually going to learn from this and step up their game?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it's hard to say for sure. I think this breach has definitely raised awareness about the importance of IoT security.
Okay. So what can be done on a larger scale?
Well, there's a lot of talk about industry-wide security standards, government regulations, things like that could help improve the security of these devices.
Okay, so that sounds promising.
Yeah.
Are there any specific regulations or standards that are being looked at right now that our listeners should be aware of?
Yeah, there are a few. The European Union, for example, is working on something called the Cyber Resilience Act.
Okay.
Which would basically set mandatory cybersecurity requirements for connected devices.
So like minimum standards.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then here in the U.S., there's the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act, which aims to improve the security of IoT devices that are purchased by the federal government. So, it's a start.
It's a start. That's good. It is encouraging to hear that, people are actually trying to do something about this at that level. But it sounds like, we still have quite a way to go before we can really trust the security of these devices.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no quick fix here. It's going to take a real multi-pronged approach. We need manufacturers on board. We need government agencies, security researchers, and of course, us, the users.
Right. So it's not just about, companies building more secure products, but it's also about us being more aware and taking steps to protect ourselves.
Exactly, yeah. It's a shared responsibility.
Yeah. And, I think this whole Mars Hydro breach has really, really highlighted that. Technology, it's great. It gives us all this convenience, but it's not without its risks.
Absolutely. And the more connected our lives become, the more discerning we have to be about the devices we use, the data we share, and the companies that we trust.
Right, right. So for our listener out there who's, been listening to all this, what would you say is the key takeaway?
I think the Mars Hydro breach, as bad as it was, really exposed this major vulnerability in the whole IoT ecosystem, but it also highlighted this need for collective responsibility. Manufacturers, they need to prioritize security, and we, the users, need to be more informed, more proactive.
Yeah. So it's not just about protecting our data, but it's about protecting our privacy, our security, our peace of mind in this crazy connected world that we live in.
Well said. I mean, this should be a wake-up call for all of us.
It really should.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who want to dig a little deeper into all of this, are there any resources that you would recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. The Mozilla Foundation has this great report called the Internet Health Report, which I think is a fantastic resource for anyone who's interested in, digital rights and security.
Yeah, and the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, they do a lot of great work in this area too.
They do. They're fighting the good fight for our digital freedoms.
Yes, they are. Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to include links to those in the show notes for everybody. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the Mars Hydro data breach. It was a lot, but hopefully you found it informative.
Yeah,
And maybe even a little bit empowering. Knowledge is power, as they say.
absolutely. And these are important conversations to have.
They really are. And speaking of important conversations, next time on the deep dive, we're switching gears completely.
Oh,
We're going to be talking about, well, let's just say it involves ancient mysteries, cutting edge science, and a discovery that could rewrite history as we know it. So if that sounds intriguing, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there in the digital world.